Welcome to our channel, where we delve into the darkest corners of reality. The stories we share are not for the faint of heart, for they explore the chilling truth that terror can lurk in the most mundane places. Today we bring you 3 spine-chilling true stories that happened in the most unexpected place, the supermarket. Imagine, if you will, the harsh fluorescent lights reflecting off linoleum floors, the rustle of chip bags and the hum of refrigerators, all masking an undercurrent of something sinister. Turn off the lights, sit back and prepare to be terrified. Our first story takes place on a night like any other. The sky, a canvas of inky black, punctuated only by the faint, cold light of distant stars. Sarah, a young woman finishing up a late shift at work, decided to make a quick stop at the grocery store. Exhaustion pulled at her, making her eager to get home to the comfort of her quiet apartment. The supermarket parking lot, usually bustling with activity, was eerily deserted. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic from a nearby highway. As Sarah pulled into a parking spot near the entrance, a shiver ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Glancing at the other cars scattered throughout the lot, she noticed they were all empty. A wave of unease washed over her. Why was she the only one here? Shaking off the feeling, she grabbed her reusable bags and quickly made her way into the store. The bright fluorescent lights and the familiar pop music playing over the speakers did little to soothe her nerves. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her the moment she entered the parking lot. As she made her way through the aisles, her unease intensified. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden danger, every corner a potential threat. The sound of her own footsteps echoed in the silence, amplifying her fear. She could have sworn she heard something move behind her, the soft scrape of a shoe on tile. But when she turned around, there was nothing there. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She just needed to get what she needed and leave. Hurrying through the aisles, she gathered the few items on her list, her anxiety growing with each passing moment. She could feel her senses on high alert, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation. Finally, with her basket full, she made her way to the front of the store, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her wallet. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager, rang up her purchases with an air of indifference, seemingly oblivious to her fear. As Sarah left the store, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She was anxious to get back to her car, to the safety of her own home. The second story takes us into the heart of a bustling city, where a young man named David found himself working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour supermarket. The night shift was an eerie experience, to say the least. The usual daytime bustle was replaced by an unsettling quiet, broken only by the hum of refrigerators and the occasional clang of a shopping cart. David, however, had grown accustomed to the solitude. He found a strange comfort in the stillness of the aisles, the way the fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows that danced around him as he worked. One particularly slow night, David found himself alone in the store. His only companions were the rows of silent shelves and the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. He was in the middle of restocking a shelf of canned goods when he heard it, a noise. It was a soft sound, like someone was dragging their feet across the linoleum floor. He paused, listening intently, his heart starting to beat a little faster. He strained his ears, trying to identify the source of the sound. It was coming from the next aisle over, the one with the cereal and breakfast foods. David cautiously made his way to the end of the aisle and peered around the corner. The aisle was empty. He could have sworn he heard someone or something moving around in the aisle. He took a deep breath, telling himself it was probably just his imagination. After all, he had been working long hours lately and he was probably just tired. He went back to stocking the shelves, but the unsettling feeling remained. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that he wasn't alone. A few minutes later, he heard it again, the dragging sound, this time closer. Chapter 3. Haunted Storage Room. Our final tale takes us to a small town where the local supermarket held a dark secret hidden behind its ordinary facade. It all started with strange occurrences in the storage room. Employees reported hearing whispers in the dark, items falling from shelves for no apparent reason, and a constant feeling of being watched. Most brushed it off as tricks of the imagination, but for one employee, a young woman named Maria, the truth was far more terrifying. Maria had worked at the supermarket for a few years, and she had always felt a strange energy in the storage room. It was always colder than the rest of the store, and there was a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that made her skin crawl. She had tried to avoid going in there alone, but her duties often required her to venture into the dimly lit space. One evening, as Maria was organizing a shelf of cleaning supplies, she felt a cold spot settle over her. The air grew heavy, as if an unseen presence had entered the room. She shivered, pulling her sweater tighter around her. As she turned to leave, she noticed something strange out of the corner of her eye. One of the cardboard boxes on the top shelf was slightly ajar, and she could swear she saw something move inside. Her heart skipped a beat. She slowly approached the shelf, her eyes fixed on the box. As she got closer, she heard a soft scratching sound coming from inside the box. Curiosity and fear warred within her. She cautiously reached out and slowly opened the box. It was empty, except for a single yellowed photograph lying at the bottom. The photo showed a young woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with a look of terror. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this woman before, but there was something about her eyes, something hauntingly familiar. As she continued to stare at the photograph, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy, and she could hear whispers swirling around her, though she couldn't make out the words. She quickly dropped the photograph back into the box, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to get out of there. As she turned to leave, she felt a cold hand grip her arm. She screamed, whirling around to confront her attacker, but there was no one there. The storage room was empty. She stumbled back against a shelf, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of what had touched her. She was alone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was still in the room with her, watching her, toying with her. From that day forward, the strange occurrences in the storage room intensified. Maria would often hear her name being called from the shadows, only to turn and find herself utterly alone. Objects would move on their own, flying off shelves with unnatural force, as if propelled by an unseen hand. The temperature would plummet without reason, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. Maria tried to tell her co-workers about what she had experienced, but they dismissed her claims as overactive imagination or attempts to get attention. They laughed off her fears, attributing the strange occurrences to drafts, faulty wiring, or rats. But Maria knew better. She knew that something sinister lurked within the walls of the storage room, something that fed on fear and reveled in torment. One night, Maria was closing up the store alone. As she made her rounds, checking to make sure everything was secure, she found herself drawn to the storage room. She couldn't explain it, but she felt an overwhelming urge to go inside, as if she was being summoned by an unseen force. Against her better judgment, she slowly opened the door and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and the silence was deafening. Maria took a hesitant step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. As she did, she heard a soft whisper coming from the far corner of the room. It was her name, spoken in a low, raspy voice. She froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She knew she should run, but she couldn't move. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed these creepy tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more terrifying stories. The supermarket, a place we often take for granted, can reveal itself to be a breeding ground for fear when the lights are low and the aisles are empty. Who knew that the search for groceries could lead to such chilling encounters? Share your own scary supermarket experiences in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.